We're here at Cambridge High School where I teach AP History. I'm also a mother of two. A few generations ago, this would have been unusual for me to work and raise kids. I also probably would have had more, but society has progressed. Today, we're learning about women and demographic change. I'm Miss Hall, and this is AP Human Geography.
Thank you, Coach Hall, for that awesome introduction. She's one of the best teachers I know, and I thought she could speak to the personal experience of women in demographic change. Today, we're talking about topic 2.8, which is focusing on the changing role of women and the way that that has demographic consequences in different parts of the world. So we'll get into all the different ways that the world population has changed as a result of women. So the first is through fertility rates. Fertility rates, as we learned about in an earlier topic, are the rate of children that a woman is likely to have in her childbearing years. So it's the number of kids a woman is likely to have during her childbearing years. So the worldwide fertility rate has declined all around the world for a variety of reasons. In 1970, the total fertility rate of the world was 5.5 babies per woman. So think about that. It was 5.5 just 50 years ago. Now it is 2.4. So it's just above replacement level for the world right now at 2.4 babies per woman. We still see a major gap between the total fertility rate in developed countries and developing countries. And we'll talk about why that is as we go through this. So let's take a look at this chart from Gapminder. Gapminder, remember we talked about, is the organization that was started by Hans Rosling that his daughter-in-law and son still run. So I chose the United States, Russia, Nigeria, Kenya, India, China, Brazil, and Afghanistan to track these stats. So you get an idea of the fertility rate dropping over time. So if we look from 1950 to now, you can see that Kenya had the highest arc. It went all the way up to over 8 children per woman, but then it steeply declined until we get to now in 2019 is when this chart is from, where they're now below 4. So they saw a huge decline as they've developed. Now they're in stage 3, but Nigeria, a country that's still in stage 2, is still above 5 children per woman. So that fits in with that higher level that we see in sub-Saharan Africa. Afghanistan also has a really high one because they are developing and have been embroiled in civil war and different issues. India used to be at about 6 and has dropped steeply in the last 20 years to get down to just above 2. You can see that the United States, Brazil, Russia, and China all fall between that 1.5 and 2 line. So all those countries, as they've developed over time, have dropped to very low birth rates. So again, let's remember that the fertility rate in the developing world, like Nigeria, Afghanistan, and Kenya, is much higher than the developed world. And here's a map to help us understand of children per woman in 2015. So this is the total fertility rate in 2015. We still see that the lowest are found in North America, Europe, and then parts of East Asia. And then the highest in the world are found in sub-Saharan Africa. Education plays a major role in the changing demographics of the world and the way that the fertility rate has dropped. So as women become more educated in a society, they have less children. So we see in any society where women become more educated, they have less children. Some of the reasons are that they learn about the life/financial benefits of only having a certain amount of kids instead of having a lot of children. So you realize that in only having 2 or 3 children, you are able to do more, to have more money in order to go on vacations, to spend on things like healthcare or better education for those kids. And so it's a cycle of you learn and then they make more money and then they have less kids so they can spend more on each kid. Education also gives the opportunity to work and see other options than just being mothers. So in societies where women are more educated, they see the opportunities out in the world and they're less likely to have children earlier, so they have children later, or they decide not to have children. So that lowers that rate. We also see in countries with better education, women have much lower fertility rates. So let's look at a couple of those charts. So here's one where we see the direct correlation between babies per woman and the mean years that a girl spends in school. So the higher the years a girl spends in school, the lower the babies per woman is. So we can see in Niger, they have the highest fertility rate in the world. They're at almost 8 still. And girls spend on average 2 years in school there. Afghanistan has even less years in school and still has a really high fertility rate. We can see Canada has really high years in school. They have over 14 years in school per woman, and they're below 2 on fertility rate. So the more years that women spend in school, the less children they're likely to have on average. Let's look specifically at this as it changes over the course of time for one country, which is Mexico. So I chose Mexico on this. We can see tracking over the 40 years from 1970 to 2009 as girls spent longer in school in their childhood years, as they went from 4 years in school to almost 10. The fertility rate steeply drops for each 2 years that girls spend in school. So the more time that girls spend in school, the less children they're likely to have. Now we're going to focus on women in the economy and how that affects the total fertility rate. So in developed countries, women are a crucial part of the workforce. So women are as involved in many countries' economies as men are. And we see that that changes how many kids they're likely to have. So the more children you have, the harder it makes it to be competitive at work. So there are many reasons for this, and we'll talk about more of them during industrialization. But typically, women, when they start working, have to take some sort of time off to have children. So we see that women have some sort of maternity leave regardless of the country. So even if that's just time to have the baby and recover, or if it's an extended period of time to raise a baby, or in some countries, a year, we see that that is time away from work where it makes it harder to be competitive for advancements. So when you take time away from work in order to have a child, it makes it harder to compete for advances. And so we see that women, as they become more involved in the economy, are less likely to do that more than once, twice, or even 3 times. You're likely not going to have many children if it takes away from your competitive edge at work. All of the economic opportunities that women have give them the option to choose not to marry or to wait to marry. So being economically independent makes it so that women are able to make their own choices about marriage and things like that. It also gives them the option to choose not to have children. So sometimes women choose not to have children. We see in Japan, there's a growing trend of women who decide not to get married or have kids. And that contributes to their very low fertility rates. In developing countries, we see many more women who work in the household or in agriculture. So there's a much higher rate of women that work in the household in developing countries. And many of them, if they're involved in subsistence farming, which is farming just to feed your family, end up having to work in agriculture to support themselves and their family. So they don't have a job outside of the household because it's farming around the household. So we see here the women participation rates in the labor force, and it's gone up and up over the past 150 years. So you can see that we took it from some countries being in the 15 to 20% range up to where over half of women are involved in most developed economies. We can also see the positive effect that that has on the GDP of a country. So the gross domestic product per capita in the US is higher because of the women's labor force participation. So in 2017, you can see a comparison of the countries and the percentage of women who are involved in the economy and how that affects your GDP. So the countries on the right that are closer to 90% of women involved in the economy have a much higher GDP than the countries that are on the left side of this at below 50%. And then here's a chart that shows female agriculture workers. So it's really showing how many women in the society are involved in agriculture. And we can see that the countries that have really high percentage of agriculture workers also have a higher fertility rate. So also have more babies per woman. So like Afghanistan, Nigeria, both still have really high rates, but we can see those dropping as women move out of agriculture and into other fields. And all the countries that have very low percentages of women in the left that work in agriculture have much lower fertility rates. So as women get out of agriculture and into the rest of the economy, they're more likely to have less children. Healthcare and a country's policy towards women in health plays a major factor in the total fertility rate. So let's look at that. Healthcare and maternity policy affect the fertility rate as much, if not more, than anything else that we've talked about. So as women have easier access to contraception And contraception is like birth control or anything that stops the having of babies. So as women have easier access to contraception, we see the total fertility rate dramatically drop. So some cultures teach against this or oppose the use of contraception. So in more traditional religions, women have less access to contraception, so we see higher fertility rates in those countries. Saudi Arabia is a good example of this. Although they're further on development, we see that women have less access to education and contraception, and so their fertility rate is higher than some of the other countries that have similar GDPs and education. Now, in the developed world, the majority of births are planned. So most of the births in the developed world are where a family plans on having a child and tries to have a child. Better healthcare gives women better prenatal and postnatal care. So prenatal is like doctor's visits, vitamins, making sure to do regular checkups on the baby before it's born. And then postnatal care is taking care of the mother after she delivers the baby. Those lower maternal and infant mortality rates, so they make people healthier, they make the mom and the baby healthier. And when we see that when babies survive longer and the moms are healthier, that also lowers the total fertility rate. So as women realize that their children will live into adulthood, they end up having less children because they're not as worried about all of them surviving. And that tipping point is about like 93 to 95%. When you have 93 to 95% of babies making it to adulthood, then the number drastically drops. So countries with too low of total fertility rates, countries that are worried that their population is dwindling, take pro-natalist policies that we talked about in topic 2.7, and they do things like give women longer maternity leave with guaranteed job return when they get done. They give a lot of options of cheaper education for children. They give all sorts of incentives for women to have more kids because they realize that they're struggling to replace their population. We see here, this is a list of countries with the total weeks of paid maternity leave, so the full rate equivalent. You can see that we're very low on that scale. We don't offer much paid maternity leave. Estonia, surprisingly, is the highest in the world with 86 weeks, but you can look through and see the other developed countries and how much maternity leave they give. So that's an incentive for women to have more children when they give more maternity leave. So there's a huge cultural impact too on women as we talk about birth rates and health. So in some cultures, having a female child is seen as a burden. And so during the one-child policy, the famous one-child policy we talked about in topic 2.7 in China, some families would only choose to keep the baby if it was male, because they saw that if they had a male baby, they thought it would better take care of them as they aged out of working. So they would actually abort any children after they found out the sex of the baby who were female, because they knew if they could only have one baby, they didn't want it to be female. And countries have tried to combat against that choice. India is currently struggling this with the sex ratio of male babies being 109 to 100. That's way above normal. And it's because daughters are seen as a cost due to paying dowries for marriage and not providing for elderly parents. So we see this as a major struggle in India to this day that they try to fix. So here's some propaganda in China where they're trying to convince people that having a female child is good and okay. We can see these rates, though, with the sex ratio of boys towards 100 girls. In many parts of China, we see a huge discrepancy between males and females. They actually have now an aging population of males who are unable to marry because of how many fewer females there are in society. And the darkest red are the hottest spots for that. Only a few of the areas on the map show an equal or more female to male sex ratio. And then that growing older population of China with the men who are aging out and unable to marry is a problem that they feel like they need to face. We also see propaganda in India where they're encouraging people to have female children. And so this is a family happily raising their daughter, and then the jobs that she could potentially do that they wouldn't be a financial burden on the family. And in India, we can see the pink or green are acceptable or close to average rates of females to males. But then all of the blue areas, especially that darkest area around Kashmir, are way, way more males to females. And that's because of self-selecting of children. And then finally, the way that movement affects women. Now that women have gotten more options since the Industrial Revolution, there was a social scientist named Ravenstein, who we'll learn about in a couple of topics, who said that women are more migratory than men within a country. So within a country, internal migration, women are more migratory than men. And since they have more options in education and in the economy, they want to move to go seek out those options. So as women after the Industrial Revolution moved out of agriculture and had more options, they're more migratory. So they try to move to other places to seek better opportunities. Here's a map of the female share of migrants. And we can see that around pink is about 50-50, and anything darker is where more women are moving than men. So you see a lot of countries where more women are moving than men in order to seek better economic opportunity. That was topic 2.8 of our class, talking about population and about how women's issues affect the population. We see that the total fertility rate always goes down the more educated women get and the more access to healthcare and contraception they have. We also saw that women are more migratory than men inside of countries as they seek more economic opportunities. Women and demographic change is something we're going to focus on many more times as we go forward through this class. And learning about that is just one more step into understanding our world. I'm Mr. Coulter, and that was Human Geography.